This episode is going to be on basal body temping. And before you check out, because you're like, I don't do that, or I'm a master at it, I want you to approach this episode with excitement because we cover a lot of nuance here in why it matters, who should be doing it, how to do it, and a lot of variables that come along the way. We covered this topic years ago when we started the podcast, and we want to bring back the basics to front of mind. Maybe you've been listening to every episode and you've binged through and you're caught up. This is for you. If you're new to the podcast, this is also for you. Valuable gems, some personal life updates that are in it as well. And this is just a great episode of two fertility dietitians, two fertility practitioners, and two people who have lived in fertility in different ways, breaking it down for you. And I'm so excited that you're here.
Before we jump into this episode, I want to remind you that while Caitlin and Sophia are dietitians, we're not your dietitians. This means the information shared in the Food Freedom Fertility podcast is intended to entertain, educate, and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care. This information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making any changes.
Welcome to another episode of Food, Freedom, and Fertility. We are here today, your dietitian besties, Caitlin Johnson and Sophia Pavia, and we are just so glad to be doing a solo episode. Lately, we've been doing some episodes with
Guests
guests
all the time.
or one-offs, and it's just so fun to just be staring at my best friend's face right now. I feel like it's food for my soul at this moment with all
Oh,
that I
that's
have
so
going on in my
sweet.
life.
Thank you for
And
saying that. My daughter, I have a little bit of lipstick on, listener. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see I've got a little bit of color. My daughter asked me, Mommy, are your lips bleeding? And I was like, I thought this was like a super subtle pink that just adds a little bit of
it is.
brightness to
It's
my face.
beautiful.
But apparently it looks like my lips are bleeding to my 4-year-old. So I was like, all right, well, thanks for that.
My children, if I walk out of my room without my glasses on, Seamus, my 3-year-old, would be like, Mom, go get your glasses. Because I'm just not his mom without my face being normal.
Yeah.
And that's my normal face to
Hmm.
him. It's pretty cute.
Yeah, they don't, and they'll comment on anything. They'll be like, Mom, your yellow teeth are really shining today. And you're like, oh, is that a compliment?
Okay, so I have
Okay.
to tell this really funny story.
Orders white strips on Amazon.
So I went to take care of, and basically it's like an aunt for our listeners' purposes, who had a hip replacement in California. It was like great timing. I needed a break from cancer treatment life over here. And I just spent a week making food and drinking wine and hanging out with one of my best friends who just happens to be my parents' age and play nurse for like one person. Anyway, it was so wonderful. And I was FaceTiming my children like the second night I was there, right before her boyfriend left. So I was like kind of taking over duty from her boyfriend that lives out of town, caring for her. And my children don't know her to have a boyfriend. It's like the first time in 25 years of me knowing this gal, of her having a boyfriend. So Bonnie, my middle, of course, is like, I want to FaceTime with you. So my friend gets the phone and she's like, who else is on the couch with you? And she's like, oh, this is my boyfriend. And Bonnie, my 5-year-old's like, huh, he's not your husband? And she's like, no, he's not my husband. He's my boyfriend. And it just gets really quiet for a minute. And then she goes, aren't you like older than an adult? Basically asking her, like, adults, when they're with someone, they're not boyfriends anymore, they're husbands. And you're like even older than the adults that I know because this gal's 70. She's
Oh
like
gosh.
basically saying, like, he should be your husband. You're too old to just have a boyfriend. But then that became the running joke the whole week I was there. I'd be like, how you doing today? How'd you sleep? And she'd,
When you get
jokingly,
married.
yeah, jokingly whine about something. I'd be like, well, be patient with yourself. You are older than an adult. Anyway, okay.
Oh
We're not
gosh.
here to talk about what our children say. That is so funny. We're here today. We're kind of doing like a retro episode. Like, think, Sophia and I are babies of the 80s. Think like we're getting back to the start of
Bring
it.
it on back.
Yeah,
Bring
like
the old thing back.
We're gonna crimp our hair and put our hair up on the
I
top of our
wish.
head and
Listen,
wear
I
really
look good with
fun.
crimped hair,
You
except it
do,
looks stupid when it's not in trend. But I get my hair is so like fine and flat. And so when I crimp it, I've got this volume and I love it. But then you look stupid because you have crimped hair. But
'cause
the
you're not
volume looks
in the
good.
'80s anymore. I think you know what? If you got it, rock it, bring it back. Anyway, that's what we're doing. We're bringing it back. We're gonna kinda do a little bit of a series on back to the basics and recover some, topics that we've covered before. Today, we're gonna talk about basal body temping and probably zoom out a little bit more in the context of what symptothermal and other, methods are of just communicating ovulation and other things about your cycle to you. That's what we're going to talk about today. But make sure you're subscribed to the podcast because in the next few weeks, we're going to go over other topics as well that I think you'll get a refreshed perspective because Sophia and I are like 5 years into this podcasting now
Hmm.
and talk better and maybe have
We
also
talk
learned a
better. We're
few
more
things.
succinct. And we've seen more and know how to sort of communicate that to you now. So it might seem like basal body temperature, snooze fest. And you'd be right. It's not really that sexy. It's not that exciting. There's no way to do it so right that it's going to solve all your problems. And there's no way to do it so wrong that you're like risking your life. There's no thrill here. There's nothing edgy about this at all. And you're not going to see beautifully done, peer reviewed, double blind research studies on it because there's no product to sell.
Mhm.
What is it? $15 for a for a thermometer at the drugstore or less. This No one is going to make a buck off of this. And in fact, it may actually deter some deep pocket companies from being able to sell you something because you maybe won't need their letrozole. You maybe won't need their follistim. You maybe won't need all these
IVF.
things because, yeah, you maybe won't need IVF because you're going to understand what's happening in your body and be able to potentially start remedying that. So, basal body temperature is not a treatment. That it in and of itself isn't going to get you pregnant. It's a diagnostic tool so that we can understand where you need support, maybe if you do need treatment, and how to begin with that kind of thing. So it's really important no matter where you are in your journey, but it's also not sexy, dangerous, or exciting. But we're
Mhm.
going to give you the straight truth about it here, answer all your questions so that you can be an expert on you in your own home, and if you need fertility help, you can get it and not just walk into a doctor's office and say, I want baby. And they say, okay, stop birth control pill, take any prenatal, come back 1 year. And then you come
Is
back
this
one
like a
year and say,
Chinese
I want
doctor?
baby.
Stop birth control. Come back 1 year. No, this
These
is
are
the
cavemen
Vietnamese
talking to each other.
nail lady doctor.
Okay, come on. Listen, let's not bring racial stereotypes into this, Caitlin. I thought you were supposed to be the progressive one of the two of us.
I totally am. That's why I'm calling you on it.
It's supposed to be
Okay.
cavemen talking to each other. Like
Oh.
dumb, half a brain cavemen that
Oh, well,
just
then
don't know how to communicate anything to each other.
you need the
Me
sound
want
to
baby.
there you
Ho,
go.
ho.
There you go.
Dude, this reminds me of, have I ever told you about Dr. Ma at the school that I went to?
Uh-uh.
There was this absolutely brilliant five element Chinese medicine practitioner in the school that I went to. She worked for the School of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine. Her name was Dr. Ma, and she wore these really big glasses, like windshield glasses, and bright red lipstick at all times, no other makeup. That was it.
Mhm.
Just these like blood red lips and huge glasses. And she was a wonderful Chinese medicine practitioner, but was Chinese through and through. Chinese culture, Chinese customs, Chinese way
Everything.
of dealing with
Mhm.
people. And studying under her, she would just react to things and just say things that here in America were like, Dr. Ma, you cannot say that to people. So she would always like analyze your pulse and look at your tongue. She'd be like, stick out your tongue. And you stick it out and she'd go, oh. this is very much dampness, or like whatever she was saying. But she would almost make this like horrified face, oh, and make this deep grunt. Or like if she'd be explaining to somebody, here's why you're having these symptoms, she'd be like, well, you are fat, and so your fat is making a problem. And you're like, geez, Dr.
Does
Ma, you
this
can't talk to people like that. Like she squeezed this guy's belly. She just reached out her hands and like squished his belly and went, well, you are fat, and like squeezed it. And I was just like, oh my God, I got
mortified?
to get the hell out of here. Yeah, mortified. But
Oh my
she's
gosh.
like, listen, this is just the way, like, you are fat. You have blue eyes. You are short. It is Wednesday. Like, she just says these things, like, as though it's just the weather, like, how could you insult somebody by saying it's Wednesday? It just is Wednesday. You just are fat, and I'm going to squeeze your gut while I say this
Oh
to you.
my gosh. You know what it is giving right now is Professor what Trelawney, and I can't believe I'm about to
Yeah.
take you to Harry Potter, but like
Oh, I'm already there.
the tea leaves. Like you just
Grim.
All right, reeling us
You
in.
are the
What
grim.
I would like you to, for the rest of the episode, to try and speak in your most favorite Harry Potter character accent and answer all the questions I'm about to ask you.
Oh my God, but who is my favorite character?
Okay,
I
I'm
don't know
kidding.
who to choose. Buckbeak, okay? And he doesn't talk, so there you go.
There you go.
Hey, Food Freedom and Fertility family, it's Sophia introducing Fertility Cloud. High treatment costs can be daunting, but here's some good news. 80% of Fertility Cloud patients have gotten pregnant for under $2,000 after just 5 months of treatment. Starting your family doesn't need to come with a huge price tag. Fertility Cloud virtual consultations mean you can talk to them from the comfort of your couch. They create personalized plans for men and women, whether it's ovarian stimulation with Clomid or Letrozole, Ovidrel trigger shots, guidance on male fertility, or even weight management support with medication. As a special for Food Freedom and Fertility listeners, get $50 off your initial medical doctor consultation. With meds delivered in just a day or two, unlimited support for your questions, and free follow ups when needed, they're here to make your path to parenthood smoother and more affordable.
All right, we are back. We are talking about basal body temperature so that you can be an expert on your own fertility health, so that you can walk into the doctor and say, hey, I know I need help with ovulation stimulation because I don't ovulate until day 50 of my cycle. And this is why I know it. You'll have data, actual hard data that can inform your fertility choices or whatever other decisions you want to advocate for, making your own health in your own home. But this is data we're talking about. So, if somebody walked up to you and said, just on the street, and they don't know anything, and they're like, hey, I just heard that you're a fertility expert, and my sister told me I should start doing something called BBT. What is BBT?
Ah, an excellent question, young Padawan. So basal body temperature, BBT, we use them interchangeably because basal body temperature is sort of a mouthful. And it is basically your body's lowest temperature in a 24-hour span. That's really what we're trying to measure. It is just the temperature that your body is sort of running at baseline. And the reason we want to measure that specifically is because it will change once your cycle shifts from ovulatory to post ovulatory. Once you ovulate, the place on your ovary that had the follicle with the egg inside of it ruptures, the egg comes out, and that place where the egg was, that follicle, becomes a brand new organ called the corpus luteum. It begins secreting high levels of progesterone, and progesterone stimulates a rise in your metabolism. So we're going to see a rise in that basal body temperature. We also can see a shift in things like your heart rate. We'll see a shift in your appetite. We'll see a shift in your sleep. But because those things are a little more subjective, a little more difficult to measure, we measure the basal body temperature, which is essentially going to happen right about when you wake up in the morning. I mean, if you want to get really technical, it happens about 2 hours before wake up, but we're still going to get a really accurate number, at least accurate enough for our purposes. by measuring your temperature at the same time every morning, right when you wake up. So when we talk about measuring your basal body temperature, we're not talking about a random temperature at any point throughout the day. We're talking about very specifically first thing in the morning, before you've taken a sip of water, before you've gotten up to pee, before you've checked your phone. We are checking your temperature right at wake up every single day and looking at the trends over time. That is going to show us when you ovulate. It can't predict when you ovulate. It can only confirm that you've ovulated because your temperature is only going to shift after that follicle becomes a corpus luteum. So it's going to tell us you already ovulated, but it can also tell us, I don't think you've ovulated yet. So in that way, it maybe is a bit predictive. Like, well, I know I had my period on the first of the month. It's now the 13th. My basal body temperature hasn't shifted yet. Chances are I may be fertile during this time. But that's really not that useful if you don't ovulate until day 40, like day 13. Like,
Mhm.
what are we really doing here? But it will tell you you haven't ovulated yet. But
Mhm.
in and of itself, like, we can't just take a temperature and say, oh my gosh, it's 98.4. That means I'm going to ovulate soon, or that means I ovulated. Everyone is different. We have to look at the trend. So we can't just take a random morning temp and say, I ovulated, I didn't ovulate. We have to look at your trends over time. So this tool only becomes useful if we're measuring it every morning at the same time.
Mhm.
Does
And
that
I
answer
would
your question?
It does answer
Or
my
there's more?
question. And I think that there's a piece of, like, I wanna use the word ignorant, but don't take it in a negative connotation. Uneducated, or maybe in one example I'm about to give, willingly uneducated. But I think there's 2 ends of the spectrum that have some level of ignorance about ovulation, and I'm gonna explain both of them. The first is just women not having ever been told much about their cycle, and we're
Yeah.
in kind of a cultural revolution in that sense, and I think social media is really, providing a speed and an exponential education that maybe we would see happen more slowly if we didn't have social media. So in that regard, I'm really happy. But, like, we don't know when we're ovulating because nobody ever told us when in your cycle you were ovulating. In fact, most of us left sex ed thinking you could get pregnant every day of your cycle. And so there's, like, this complete ignorance or uneducation on one side of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the people that we hold as, like, the masters of cycles are OBGYNs. And many of them, if asked, when do women ovulate, will give one answer: day
Mhm.
14 of their cycle. And that's, even though that might be an average, or when in, like, a textbook example of a cycle, somebody should ovulate, most women are not, even with a normal length cycle, ovulating on day 14 exactly.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so on that end of the spectrum, it's like you should know better, and I'll leave
Yes.
it at that. But so you have this combination of people, somebody who's uneducated going to the person that they think should be most educated, and
Hmm.
then being offered incomplete and skewed and wrong information about it. And then, in fact, I've even heard clients tell me that their doctor told them to really focus on starting to have sex around day 14 because that's when they ovulate. And the doctor is failing to tell somebody who's actively trying to conceive that it's important to have sex before we think you're going to ovulate, because the sperm needs to already be their girlfriend in, like,
Hmm.
most chances of conception. There is evidence that on the day of ovulation, if you have intercourse, that you could get pregnant. But pretty much if it's not on that day, like, your chances of getting pregnant that cycle are gone once you ovulate. And so having this data can be really powerful. That's why we want to measure it, because you can track cycle after cycle and learn things about your body that Sophia and I, even though we've heard so many stories, we're still always going to ask for a chart to look at where you've
Hmm.
tracked something like BBT, especially when somebody's like, I think I ovulated, look at my current cycle, I'm often saying, show me your last 2 or 3 as well, because I wanna look
Yes.
at your data to see what does your temp shift tend to look like. So we wanna measure it so that we can time intercourse better, so that we can learn about things that may be going awry in our body that are unexpected. For instance, you bleed regularly, but you have no signs of ovulation based on your basal body temperature. And so
Mhm.
maybe we need to talk about why is that happening and doing testing on that and not just jump to here is
Yeah,
2
here's an
different
ovulation
medications.
stimulation medication. We need to say,
Exactly.
what's your insulin doing? What's your blood sugar doing? How's your cholesterol?
Are you
What's
eating
your
enough?
vitamin D? Are you eating enough? Are you eating too much carbohydrate throughout the day in relation to the fiber and protein and movement that you're doing? There's a
Exactly.
lot of things that we can look at that can be remedied at home, essentially for free, without risks with these medications. These medications have a time and a place, absolutely, but just handing them out to anyone who's not pregnant within a year is certainly not the answer. And this can help your medical team be able to help you.
I can think of a handful of my clients, which tend to be those that have insulin resistance or diagnosed PCOS, who have done ovulation stimulation. And the doctors just tell them exactly when to have sex. But they, because they've worked with me or taken my course or listened to this podcast or taken Sophia's course, know, well, if I'm tracking my BBT, I'll know once I have ovulated. And very often in my PCOS population, they do ovulate with these ovulation induction medications, but it happens later than the doctor's expecting. So if they only have sex when the doctor tells them to have sex, like day 9 through day 16, then they don't ovulate till day 22, which is very common in a PCOS population
Mhm.
taking these medications. They lose out on the opportunity because they've had so much sex within this first window. But if you're doing BBT at home and you can tell when your temperature shift has happened, you know we need to keep having sex because I haven't ovulated by this point. And so it can really inform you in your cycle literacy and your fertility story, no matter what you're managing, and even no matter what treatment you're doing, it will be helpful to have more data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen this same situation unfold pretty early in my career, actually, working with a couple ladies that had PCOS. And this is exactly what happened with them. And so their doctor just next round, more meds, next round, more meds. And a couple of them ended up with a very dangerous condition called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome,
Mhm.
which is more common in PCOS because the ovary is very stimulated to start with. And so there can be very real risks to this, which isn't, oh, well, you're not responding to this medication, so let's just up the dosage. It's you are responding to this medication. We should not up your dosage. We need to adjust our timeline. And that would have brought a pregnancy sooner than going on all these meds and then ending up in the hospital because her ovaries are
And
going
losing an
buck wild.
ovary in some
Yeah,
cases.
thankfully nobody had to lose an ovary in any of the situations that I worked with, but it's a very real risk.
Mhm.
So yeah, very important to do. So this is why you want to know about this. I mean, even in the instances where you're having medical help, you still want to be doing this. This isn't just for the people that are only trying at home, and that's fine. It's fine if you just want, you're at the stage where you're just trying at home, or maybe that's the only stage you want to get to. This is
Mhm.
like maybe another podcast episode for another time. But I have had like a surge of people coming to me who are like, look, we want to have babies, but we want to have them made in the privacy of our home, in our love, in our marriage. And we don't really want to do like
Anything
a bunch
else?
of
Mhm.
stuff. And if a baby doesn't come from this,
We'll figure
that's
out our
that's
life
what we're,
purpose other
yeah,
ways. Yeah.
exactly. I've had sort of an influx of, I don't know if this is like a trend that's happening lately, but I have had more people being like, I'm just not really wanting to do the whole poked and prodded testing stuff. And It's a perfectly valid place to be. And
Mhm.
anyways, probably another conversation for another time. But whether that's you and you're like, look, we just want to make a baby in our love, in our marriage, in our bedroom, or you're saying, yeah, that's the dream, but I'm not opposed to having medical help, and maybe your boundary of what medical help should look is going to look like.
It's
Everybody
different.
gets to decide for
Mhm.
themselves, but it's not just for the people that are. It's not. I guess what I'm trying to say, this isn't some like podunk Hicksville can't afford a doctor, don't believe in medicine, Amish way of doing things. This is a something that's vital, even if you're doing a lot of medical treatments.
Yeah, and okay, so I think there's a lot of nuance to this, and you and I are so apt to, like, get into the nuance. Let's reel it back a little bit and talk about how does it work? How does it work if somebody were like, "Okay, today I don't know how to BBT, and by tomorrow morning I wanna be doing it." What's, like, my first steps?
First step, get a basal body temperature thermometer. This is not the thermometer that you're going to be scanning your forehead with at the doctor's office. This is not the thermometer that you stick in your ear. This is a thermometer that has this is the most important point here, gals, is two numbers after the decimal point. Okay.
Yes.
We want to see four significant figures, five significant figures. Okay. So we want it to have 2 points after the decimal. So this means we would see 98.64. This would be 97.99. We would see 2 points after the decimal, two figures after the decimal point. It is more precise than the one that you just roll over your forehead or stick in your ear, or like this. We used to have like a strip that you laid on your forehead that would like
Mhm.
light up depending on what temperature you were.
Or even more sensitive than the oral thermometer that's just
Mm-hmm.
one decimal after the one
Yes.
numeral after the decimal point. So like 98.2, which you're used to seeing that for us to check fever. And it's
Mm-hmm.
honestly not so much that that second decimal matters so much in that we need an instrument that has been designed to be more sensitive, to
Yes.
show us the nuance between 97.4 and 97.62, because that might be the first shift that shows you did ovulate. We just caught it
Mhm,
right after you ovulated. But if
mhm,
both of those somehow round to 97.5, we're not going to see that. So it's not so much that that second digit is so important, it's that the instrument is more sensitive and going to give us
exactly.
more accurate data. And that data is what informs our understanding of what's going on within our body. So, if that sounds really intimidating to you, it's okay. Walk into CVS, walk into Walgreens, walk up to the pharmacist and say, "Do you guys have basal body temp thermometers?" It's usually closer to the pharmacy, and maybe the like attendants at the health store, Walgreens or whatever may not know. They might, but if you need to, ask somebody kind of close to the pharmacy, do you have BBT thermometers? They're often like I've seen them in my CVS Target area near the feminine care stuff. So, like
Mhm,
pregnancy tests, ovulation tests, lube, tampons. Sometimes they're there, or sometimes they're near like a greater display of just thermometers kind of in that
mhm.
same area of the store.
Yeah, and you may people may some of these things. It just depends on who designed the store and who's stocking the shelf and what they decide to do. So you might need to hunt around for it a little bit, and you can buy one online as well if you don't want to go into the drugstore and do this. I don't like going to the drugstore. I feel like that's where people go when they're like sick and they're like coughing and like, oh God, I really need some Robitussin, and they're like in there. Ugh, I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna get germs in there, so I try not to go in there if I can help it. But Caitlin's like, you're a wuss. So you can get it online as well. But just look for those two decimal points. The brand is not important. It's something that's like ultra fancy and costs $75. It's not going to do more for you than the plain Jane $11 one that you're going to get on Amazon.
Yeah, and
We're just looking
don't get
for,
tricked into one with, like, fancy colors, like, "Oh, you're about to ovulate," or this or that, because we don't
yeah, so
want
it's going to
it
be
to
pink or
interpret
blue.
for you. Yeah, we want
Exactly.
you to get the data so that we can do the next step. So, step 1, get a thermometer. Step
Hmm.
2, go to sleep
Is go
and
to
have it
sleep. Yeah.
next to your bed.
Go to sleep and have it next to your bed. And step two is, I think, the hardest part, and that's wake up at the same time every day.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into towards the end of the episode what to do when that's not really happening, like or times when that's not happening. Maybe you have a really regular schedule, and most of us truly do. Most of it's like, I'm up at 6:30, I make my tea, I head to the gym, I work out, come home, eat breakfast, start my work day, or some iteration similar to that. You're waking up about at the same time every morning, and this doesn't need to be extremely precise. Like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, I woke up at 6:29 today, and yesterday I woke up at 6:32. So now it's like a moot point to take my temperature. But if we're looking at like more than 15 minutes worth of variation, it can be start to be an issue. But generally speaking, wake up at the same time every morning, and you're going to have that thermometer right next to your bed. I don't want you getting up and walking to the bathroom to find it. I don't want you rummaging through a drawer. We want you to have it right there next to your bed. So, step one, take the thermometer, put it in your hole. You get to decide what you want to
Which
do.
hole?
Most people choose mouth. You could do vagina, you could do anus. Just
If that's
stick
your thing,
to a hole, though.
the
Stick
same
to a
one.
hole.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wouldn't start putting it in your anus and then decide, "I'm not so into this," and start doing your mouth.
We don't
Uh,
want to do an
but
ass to
hey,
mouth
you can do you if
maneuver
that's
here.
really your
No, but
thing.
really, because we're looking for a change over time,
We wanna
we
use the
want to
same one.
have the same orifice each time. Some people find it annoying to have it in their mouth, and they'd rather put it in their vagina. And so they do that because then they can sit there scrolling their phone or whatever without being obstructed by this thermometer. But choose a hole and stick to it.
Mm,
So put it in. We're going to just say mouth for this purposes of the rest of this training session here. Put it in your mouth, and I want you to wait 5 minutes. Set a 5 minute timer on your phone, on your watch, on your clock, whatever you've got, keeping it in your mouth for those 5 minutes. Then you're going to turn it on and then get your temperature reading. The reason we're going to do this is because this is a very precise tool, and we want it to get to temperature before we turn it on. This is going to help us get that shift more accurately, because the temperature of your room can change, and we don't want it being really cold one day and really warm the next day. Most of these thermometers, they go off of a timer and not really like a stable temperature internal. They're just simple machines. So put it in your mouth, wait 5 minutes, turn it on, get your temperature, record it right then. Do not go along your day thinking you're just going to remember. You're not. My favorite way to do this is to have my husband be in charge of recording the data.
me
So
too.
I'm the one that does this thermometer, and then I tell him the number, and he's in charge of entering it in. Whether he's doing an app like Flow or Fertility Friend or even Natural Cycles, which is a little more bougie. Um, there, or even just notes spreadsheet in a Google Doc.
Mhm.
But it's always not always feasible. If you're up at 5:30 and he's not up till 7 or something like that. I mean, even then, I would say shoot it to him in a text and have him be
Yeah.
the data guy
Then
on
there's
this.
the data. Mhm.
It's just one less thing that you have to have on your plate, and it really includes him so that
Mhm.
he is really clued in to like what's going on. Because I don't, personal pet peeve here, I don't like to be in the throes of passion and then having somebody asking me questions about my cycle. I don't like that.
Mhm.
I don't want you to be like, oh, where should I finish? And like, oh, are you fertile right now? Like mid stroke? No, thank you. I want to be out of my mind and in my body during those moments. And so I don't want to be the boss of this. I don't want to
Mhm.
be in control of our whole sex life. And I like for him to have some ownership of that. So
Mhm.
I just think it's a really great idea to shoot it to him in a text so it's there for when he wakes up, or if he's up too, then you tell it to him right there, and he's the one that does the data entry and keeps the log.
Yeah, and it's not a bad idea too to have just like a piece of paper and pen or pencil next to your bed for
Hmm.
mornings where it's like Saturday and you don't have to get up out of bed at 6:30 and you want to lay in bed till 8. Your body's probably going
Maybe
to wake
doze
you up
it
around
off
the same
again.
time. Yeah, so like
Mhm.
take your temp and then roll back over and go back to sleep if you want. Because that I would say that's one of the bigger objections to this method is I don't want to have to wake up the same time every day, or I don't wake up at the
Yes.
same time every day. And while I hear that and I can respect it, and there are more expensive suggestions that can help with that, if you want to like not spend a whole wad of cash on this and you just want to do this as cheaply as you can, you need a BBT thermometer for less than 20 bucks. And you can do this well by narrowing in your wake up time. And I will also tell you, you will have better sleep, better circadian rhythm,
Hmm.
and better overall
Hmm.
hormones and fertility if you are waking up at the same time every day. And if you're the kind of person that's like, well, but I want to drink my 4 glasses of wine on Friday night and sleep in on Saturday, like we have other things we need to talk about, your fertility and hormones that are
Oh yeah.
probably like reprioritizing certain things. So, like, commit to this for 2 months and see what you learn about your cycle and your body. Commit to waking up at the same time, set an alarm, bring your partner into it. I love the idea of including your partner because the other thing that it does is that, like, we as women are so programmed to be goal oriented and we manage a lot of things at the same time. And our brains just have things fly past it about fertility, even when we're not trying to think about it. Like, can we take one task off your brain so you don't have to think about it as soon as you wake up and like really dig into that thought and then have to think about it again later in the day when your husband's like, did you ovulate or not yet? Like he actually can know the answer to that. I think that's really
Yeah,
powerful.
on his own, and not doesn't have to consult you or ask you to pull up the data.
Right. And
And
make you
I
think
have
about
had
it when you don't want to.
Yes, yes. And I've had people, I've worked with people where the husband is the one that wakes up early in the morning to go to work. And so he has the thermometer on his side of the bed, and the room is dark, and he just is like getting up and doing his thing. He is the one that puts the thermometer in her mouth, not her vagina. Okay, puts the thermometer in her mouth at like 4:45 or whenever it is that he's getting up every day, and waits the 5 minutes, turns it on. She, is like, oh, barely aware of what's going on, but doesn't have to work a brain cell at all. It just
Mhm.
lays there. And then he gets the temp and records it all on his own because he's the one that's waking up early. And
Mhm.
keep in mind, truly your most accurate basal body temperature is actually going to happen about 2 hours before you wake up. So the closer
Mhm.
you get to that timeline, the technically more accurate it's going to be anyway. So this may even be a step beyond waking up, doing it yourself, and having him record it. So if you are partnered with a guy who is an early bird, getting up before the sun to get to work or have his time with God, or whatever it is that he's up to, the Mark Wahlberg 3:30 a.m. workout or some crazy thing like that, then having him record the temperature all on his own like that, and you're just a warm body, that can work really well for some couples too. So
Mhm.
there's not just one answer to this. This is pretty much the long and short of doing it manually. We're going to take a little break, hear from a sponsor, come back and talk about when manual temping may not be the best thing and some options that are out there.
Hey, friends, we're taking a break from this episode so I can share with you a little more about one of our sponsors, Fullwell. Fullwell's a reproductive health company offering superior nutritional supplements that are made without compromise to support women and men throughout their reproductive journey. I have taken Fullwell's prenatals, their fish oil, and have literally tried every product they've released, and I stand behind this recommendation with my whole heart. One of my favorite things to recommend to clients is their fertility trio. This includes their egg and sperm quality supplement, their women's prenatal, and fish oil. This helps proactively support you getting ready to conceive. This trio includes things like CoQ10, ashwagandha, and NAC. It makes me think of a life vest. You don't want to go into pregnancy without these foundational supports. And if you've been struggling while trying to conceive, this is the time to upgrade your prenatal fertility game and check out Fullwell. Use code FFF20 today to get 20% off your first order. Okay, I'm going to bring us back from the break with one thought on how Sophia left us. And just because
Okay.
you're here 2 hours before you wake up is the most optimal time, like, don't be that A+ overachiever that now thinks
Mhm.
they need to wake up at 4 a.m. every day to
No,
get the most
no.
accurate. Like, that is a specific scenario. If that works for you and fits in your life, just waking up at the same time that you normally wake up Monday through Friday every day and temping, and then getting up at that same time on Saturday and Sunday is enough of a lift, and we can get accurate enough data there. So,
Accurate, and that's the key. Accurate enough. We
yes.
don't, because look, we're looking at a shift over time. And
Mhm.
it's okay if you don't get this data every single day. 6 days a week,
You'll see major shifts.
28 out of 30 days a month, you'll be able to see major shifts. You might not be alerted to ovulation as quickly as if you didn't do it that way. But
Mhm.
if you miss a day or two in a cycle, it doesn't mean all your data is out the window. And so
Correct.
if you just have a couple off days, it's not going to. Same thing with taking your supplements. If you get your supplements in 6 out of 7 days a week, 28 out of 30 days a month, you're still doing great things. It's okay to miss something occasionally. Or as we get into the things that impact basal body temperature, it's okay if these things are happening occasionally. We just need to factor them in. You don't need
Mhm.
to stop living life because you're taking your temperature. Which
Mhm.
really brings us into the next thing we wanted to talk about, which is wearables and
Mhm.
ways to use more expensive, more complicated, but less prone to user error methods. And that's going to be things like your temp drop, your Ava bracelet. What are some other things on the market? Those are the two that I know of.
Anymore, your Aura rings do this, newer
Uh
Apple
huh.
Watches do
Yes,
this,
yes, yes.
and maybe not so much a wearable, but an insertable would be the OvuSense category, although they basically
Mhm.
ripped off Temp Drop's idea and have something that's wearable and not insertable. But when we say insertable, it's something that you put within your vagina every night and take out in the morning and have your phone read. So it's not the same as like a bracelet or an armband or something that you're
Mhm.
putting like next to your skin in a different way, like a watch or a ring. I have to say, I haven't interpreted as many Apple Watches or Aura Ring charts, so I can't really speak to accuracy or
Yeah, me either.
user friendliness. So that doesn't mean that they aren't great. I just don't know enough. I've seen a million temp drop charts, probably half
Yeah,
a
that's my
million
go-to as well.
OvuSense, and some Ava bracelets. Ava bracelet has some benefits to tracking some other things, but I find its data interpretation a little bit hard when we're actually only looking at basal body temperature.
I
Um,
agree. And I don't like the fact that this device comes on a bracelet made of this like brittle material that breaks, and then there's no way to replace it. The temp
mhm,
drop is basic. You can buy like bands for it on Etsy. There's like all,
mhm,
people knit like cutesy
mhm.
uh, Kansas City Chiefs, wrap or something, whatever you like, dolphins. I don't know. There's like all kinds of things that you could get. And if it wears out or breaks or doesn't fit
Yeah.
well or you lose it, you can get another one. Whereas the Aver
Mhm,
bracelet's like built into this sort of brittle, not amazing
mhm.
material wristband that if that breaks, which it does, then the whole thing is like deemed unusable. So
Yeah, you gotta
I'm
get
not
a whole
I'm
new
not a
one.
huge fan of
Mhm.
that. And Temp Drop's American made. Aver bracelets not. Well, I don't know, if you don't live in America, you probably don't care about that. But just
Yeah.
seems a little odd to ask somebody across the ocean to hand you a thermometer when there could be somebody much closer that could do it. So, but really, whatever works for you, there's benefits and drawbacks to each one. really what I want to emphasize is be honest with yourself. If you are a shift worker, if you are an insomniac, if you are like really struggling to get several hours of uninterrupted sleep, and that's something that we're working on to start with you, doing a manual basal body temperature is probably not going to be very realistic for you. And
Mhm.
I did it faithfully for years. And then when my life sort of changed, I tried to start doing it faithfully again. And cycle after cycle after cycle, I kept missing days and forgetting it and not doing it at the right time. And finally, I was like, I need to take a look in the mirror and just come to peace with who I am, and that I am no longer the girl that's good at this. And my life has changed. This is just not working for me. I need to switch to a wearable.
Mhm.
And that is fine. It is more of a expense. And now you have something that, I mean, I sort of wish the temp drop would have like a little screen on it where it says what your temperature is so
Mhm.
you could just write it down. But you do have to sync it to a smartphone or a tablet. And it's just a little more complex in that way. But it removes completely from you the burden of needing to temp at a certain time,
Mhm.
and it takes your lowest temperature throughout the night. So it
Mhm.
usually is a reading a couple hours before you wake up. So it is a bit more accurate in that way, and it's not dependent on you.
I think
Because,
too,
yeah.
another piece of it that I find attractive actually is that you don't have to charge it like an
Hmm.
Apple Watch that you have to charge. Like there is a battery you would need to replace once the battery goes down, but it's
Yeah,
not like
sort of
an
like a hearing aid
everyday.
battery. It's like a little button battery.
Yeah, it's not like an everyday I need to remember to make sure that this is
Hmm.
charged. I find that to be helpful. Um, but when I
And it
think
lasts a
about
long time. That battery lasts many cycles.
yeah, when I think about like why I would consider getting a wearable, I think about a couple scenarios. Sophia's talking about like a change in her life or lifestyle. You know, that might be if you're listening to this podcast because you're trying for a second or third or fourth kid. And before you
Totally.
had a baby or a toddler, it was easy to get up at the same time every day, but now you're waking up multiple times in the night and you're getting interrupted sleep. And that interrupted sleep is going to impact your basal body temperature.
It's true.
So, a scenario where it's no longer dependable to know that you'll wake up and actually do this, or your schedule is different, like you mentioned, shift workers, people that have different shifts, even if you're not like a major shift worker, you work at Starbucks and sometimes you start work at 4:45 and sometimes you go in at 8. Like even just that type of variability and how it may impact your sleep time
Hmm.
makes you a really good candidate for a wearable. I would also say you're a good candidate for a wearable if you can afford it. If this is something that's going to stretch you for a while, maybe save up and graduate to it and spend a few months doing BBT on your own to just learn the method. Um,
Hmm.
what other scenarios would you maybe bring up to somebody where they should really consider a wearable over an oral thermometer?
If you travel a lot, I would recommend this. Even if it's not, you have to
Time
go to
zone.
China to the manufacturing facility 4 times a year and it's like major travel. But even if it's like every other Friday, I have to go to this corporate meeting in Tulsa, and it's just 1 hour time difference from where you live, or just traveling in general, just sleeping in a different bed, being in a different place is going to impact your wake ups and how often how alert you are in the night and things like that. Just human nature, really. So that would be another one that I would put to this. What else? I think it's the only
Just
other
the
piece
major
that I'm
ones.
thinking about.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I think a lot of
as far
people
as
listen
someone
to
being a
us and
candidate
they
for it.
think like they need to use a temp drop, and I like
Hmm.
you don't
This has
have
got me
to.
like wanting to look in my drawers. Like, where the hell is my temp trap? I feel like is it in the room with me now? Bunch of dog poop bags. I don't even have a dog.
That is hilarious. Okay, let's move on
So
from when to
that's what that
consider
is.
switching a wearable, and let's talk about things that do impact what the reading of your basal body temperature is.
Very, very important. So there are things, and we sort of mentioned them already, some of them, the major ones being sleeping in or waking up extra early. This is going to impact your basal body temperature. So, Caitlin, isn't there like a calculation or something like add a tenth of a degree for every 15 minutes you sleep in or something like what
Mm,
is the calculation on
I
that?
don't remember, but
I
you
don't
could
remember
Google
it
it.
either. Oh, that's not good. Okay. Caitlin, why don't you Google that real quick and I'll say some other things that can impact your base body temperature. So, sleeping in is one of them, illness is another. Obviously, sister, if you are running a temperature, we're not going to get an accurate basal body temperature if you have a fever. It's going to read really high because you have a fever. And that doesn't mean you suddenly ovulated, it means that you are sick. And so, that is going to impact your basal body temperature. And even if you don't necessarily have a fever, like Caitlin, for instance, a couple nights ago got the tummy bug from hell and was trapped in the bathroom several times throughout the night. She is not going to get an accurate read from a wearable or otherwise when you're sick and up and down all night long. Or even I had a respiratory infection a couple weeks ago and was coughing and blowing my nose and struggling to breathe at night. I'm not going to get an accurate basal body temperature in those situations because I'm sick. And same thing goes for if you're in a lot of pain. So if you threw your back out, if you rolled your ankle, if you broke a bone, and you're in a lot of pain, your temperature is going to read higher because your body's working really hard and pain is a stress. So if you're
Mhm.
in pain or sick or injured, your basal body temperature is going to likely read higher. And so that's why we're going to also look at some other metrics and talk about in other episodes other ways to monitor your fertility because your temperature in those acute situations might not be that accurate. It's hopefully you're not going to be in like chronic pain and be hurting every single night in these instances. Hopefully it's like I rolled my ankle and so for a couple nights I had to like sleep with it elevated and use an ice pack. But then once the healing process started, I was able to be more comfortable and get some quality sleep. But pain is another big one. Pain and illness are two big things. You can't really change those, right?
Mhm.
So those are like non-alterable things that just happen because of life. Now back to Caitlin. What's the calculation on that?
Okay, so 2
You find
thoughts.
it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Also, I don't know where this calculation came from, so take it with a grain of salt. What I would do is chart your actual taken temp, and then if you want
Mhm.
to make a note and adjust it, then make a note, but I would, even if you wake up 2 hours after you normally do or an hour earlier, record the temp that you actually found on your thermometer, and I would only adjust this if it was on an internal temp and not a wearable, okay? So differentiate this a little bit. I wouldn't do this with a wearable if I woke up 2 hours later. The wearable's already kind of accounting for those things. Would you agree, Sophia, or no?
Yes, I
Yeah,
would.
okay.
And just a note on the wearable, I feel like we should say this. I meant to say this when we were talking about the shift between oral thermometer or manual thermometer and wearable. Internal temp and skin temp are going to be different.
Mhm.
So you need to pick one and stick to it, and do not be scared if when you switch to the temp drop, suddenly your temps are in the high 97s and they were
Mhm.
in the mid 98s before. This is
Mhm.
simply the difference between skin temperature and internal temperature. And we're looking for change over time. Same thing. That's why I'm like sort of the aura ring. I wonder because like your hands can get quite cold quite easily. And so I wonder how really accurate. Same thing with your
Yeah.
wrist. It's so distal from your core that it makes me wonder really how accurate these things are. But we're
Mhm.
looking at change over time. So you need to stick with the same thing and don't be alarmed when, I'm not even going to say if, when your skin temperature readings are significantly lower than your core temperature readings. Your
Mhm.
skin is cooler than your core, just is.
Yes, okay, so here's the calculation. 1/10 of a degree for every half hour difference. Let's say you woke up at the time and it would have been 97.5. If you sleep in an extra hour, your temp's going to read like 97.6. So if you wake up after you would normally wake up, we're going to subtract to get your what it should have been. If you sleep, if you wake up
Ay, ay,
earlier,
ay.
okay, so if you
Mhm,
wake up
mhm,
earlier by an
mhm.
hour, it's gonna be lower. So we would add 2/10 of a degree, right?
Yes.
Okay,
I
so
was thinking about that
obviously it's confusing and hard,
backwards.
and so maybe just make a note of it.
All
I
of the
was gonna
girls in
say
here that are like scientists and engineers are like,
they got
"Oh
us.
my
No,
god, you
no, they
girls are
got us.
dumb as
Everybody else
stump."
is like, "I don't even wanna hear this. I don't understand. It's too complex." Like, if it's hard for us
Oh
to think
no.
about it, then I would, like, listen to this. If you're doing oral temps or internal temps of any kind, and you wake up late, just make a note of it, because the next day you're gonna wake up at the normal time and see that your temp came back down and you didn't actually ovulate, okay? So just make notes, and that brings us to kind of something we've jetted straight past, and that is where we actually recording these temps.
Mhm.
We need to record them, either choose an app, and I think Sophia and I have different thoughts on different ones, and they've probably evolved over time. So what we would have recommended 5 years ago in an episode on this may be different. Um, but choose an app, which is nice because it talks to some of them. It's stored in the cloud, so your husband can enter and look at it. You can enter and look at it, and not have to be on the same actual mobile
Mhm.
device. If it's not stored in the cloud, not all of them are. If it's not stored in the cloud, then you should probably find one where it is stored in the cloud, so that if multiple devices log in with the same
Mhm.
login, that they can both access the data and enter data.
Yes.
Otherwise, like, doing it on charting paper, you can print one offline. I have one that is extended for people with PCOS. So if you have like a 60-day cycle, you're not running out of paper.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll give that to Kaylee that we can link in the show notes if you want to print one out and just get used to the process. But the biggest thing that I would say, whether you're charting this online in some sort of app or you're charting it on paper, is you need to be taking notes. If you
Mhm.
are sick and your temp is 2 degrees higher, like 2 full degrees, make a note that that's when you had the tummy bug. If you did wake up early, make a note, I woke up early. If you were traveling, make a note in the actual
Mhm.
app that says, I was in Salt Lake City this weekend, so that you, when we're looking at the thing 4 months from now and we're asking questions about what is your temperature shift look like when you ovulate, we're not going to be able to remember that 4 months from now. You might remember it
Mhm.
within the same cycle you're in, but just like anything, more data is more data and can be informative and helpful. Make notes on those things so that you're not questioning
Absolutely.
yourself later on.
And same thing goes for just normal life events. Super Bowl Sunday, you were up really late, eating carbs, drinking beer. The next morning, you may have an inaccurate reading. You went out to a girls' night and had a glass of wine. You decided to go for a second serving on pasta the night before, and your blood sugar is higher or lower or whatever in the night. Blood sugar shifts can really impact your basal body temperature. Uh, you maybe didn't travel time zones, but you traveled altitudes. So that's like it. You know, I'm in California. If I go up and have a romantic weekend at a cabin in the Sierra Nevadas, and I'm going from sea level to 7,000 feet elevation, 8,000 feet elevation, my basal body temperature is naturally going to be higher. So
Mhm.
these things will all impact your basal body temperature, and just make notes of it, because it doesn't mean that this reading is trash and out the window and can't be used. It just will explain an anomaly to where we see that, okay, regular temp, higher
Ooh,
for
it
the
went
two
up. I'm
nights,
so
you're wrong.
excited. But then it goes back down.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then it goes back down and you didn't actually ovulate. And then 3 days later, it goes up and stays up. Okay, now's when I ovulated. Just want
Mhm.
to keep note of these things. They just impact your basal metabolic rate and thus your basal body temperature. So these things are all normal things, normal occurrences in life. Sort of moving forward, Caitlin, when would somebody want to maybe seek medical help because they're seeing some weird things in their basal body temperature?
Yeah, I think that this comes up quite often, and it's especially true. And if you were to Google this, you'll hear if I have thyroid conditions, it may impact my basal body temperature. And so
Hmm.
if the first basal body temping method you use is a skin temperature, I want to remove any alarm or fear around the fact that the numbers I'm about to spit out to you are normal numbers, like on a temp drop. But if you were to be
Hmm.
charting with your oral or an internal basal body temperature, people would start being alarmed at a regular temperature being in the 96s and even sometimes in the low 97s.
Hmm.
Whereas low 97s is a really normal temp drop figure pre
Yeah, because
ovulation.
again, looking at skin temperature and not internal temperature.
Yeah. So if you start seeing really low, I would say under 97 on a skin temp, or maybe even under 97.2 on an oral temp pre ovulation, I would want to dial in a little bit on what's going on with my thyroid.
Yeah, get
Other
your thyroid tested.
other questions that you should ask yourself are, am I under eating? Because I've had a
Hmm.
lot of clients who have been under eating chronically for a very long time, end up with low basal body temperatures, and we look at their thyroid and everything looks great. And it's like, well, then what is it? And I know that it's impacting things. You may actually just be under eating for what your body needs.
Hmm.
And that's impacting both your basal body temperature and likely things like egg quality and uterine
And that can
implantation.
happen to women of many different sizes. So
Yes.
please don't hear Caitlin saying this and think that this is just for the fun sized gals. This actually happens pretty frequently in chronic dieters, which tend to be curvier gals. So if
Mhm.
this is you and you're like, I weigh 188 pounds, there's no way I'm under eating, you might be.
Yeah.
You still might
When
be at
when
at your
Sophia
size.
said the fun size gals, she's talking about candy, I think.
Like the candy bar, a fun size candy bar.
Not everybody's gonna know that reference, I don't think.
Sophia here, interrupting this episode to talk about fond bone broth, tallow, and lard. So, fond bone broth has long since been a staple in my home kitchen. I use this all the time. You will always find it in my kitchen. And do you know what? I even make my own bone broth. That's how much I love fond is I pay money for something that I also regularly make for myself. It is beyond delicious. The flavors that they have in these broth, it's so deep and complex. It's not like a can of Swanson's. It's not just like the chicken and stars type flavor, though that can be delicious at times. This is such a complexity of flavor. It's almost like a beverage, and I'm not exaggerating. Plus, you can use it in cooking, everything from vegetables, starches, grains. Very, very easy way to get more collagen, protein, and minerals into your life by simply cooking with broth. It is truly delicious, and it will take any dish you use to cook with it, from just a normal dish on the table to truly gourmet. So head on over to fondbonebroth.com and use code FFF10 for 10% off your first time order. Bye.
She's
Yes.
she's
But
not
this
saying that
petite.
skinnier girls are more fun.
No, I'm
Um,
talking about candy bar size. And you
yeah.
listen, everybody likes the king size candy bars better anyway.
Mhm.
Who's
I know.
fun for who? Who's having more fun with that tiny piece of candy? Not me. Okay, I got to get going. We got to wrap up this episode, but I want to also just give you some final thoughts about basal body temperature and whether or not you're seeking fertility treatments. All right, because fertility medications, fertility treatments are going to impact your basal body temperature, but you still need to see that shift to confirm an ovulation.
Mhm.
So you might have other things confirming ovulation too. You may be having serial blood draws where we're looking for that progesterone rise. You might be having imaging where we're actually looking for that egg. Every day we're looking at that follicle, looking at that follicle. When's that baby going to burst? And so we could be confirming ovulation in multiple ways. And but I still recommend basal body temperature when you're doing these things for the exact reason that Caitlin just stated at the very beginning of this episode, that oftentimes gals with various conditions like hypothalamic amenorrhea, luteinizing unruptured follicles, polycystic ovarian syndrome will respond to these ovulation medications, but later on in the cycle than gals that don't have these things going on.
Mm-hmm.
So you still want to be tracking your temp, even if you're using treatments and medications during your cycle.
Mm-hmm. Do you have time for a quick yeah, girl?
I got time for a quick yeah, girl.
Okay,
But
my
then I
yeah,
gotta go. I
girl.
gotta go have my own acupuncture session.
My yeah, girl, way to go, taking care of yourself. Two, really quick. I'm looking out my window at like 6 inches of snow right now, which I've never seen in Kansas. We had like 4 inches a few weeks ago and it felt like so much. So we have some really fun snowmans in my future and maybe snow
Yes,
angels.
you do have like some sled possibilities or something like
Yeah, the
that.
only
Oh,
problem is that we
fun.
live in Kansas, so the only hills are like the overpasses. But I know the one we're gonna
Yeah.
go to. Okay, so that and we're like 2/3 of the way through my dad's chemo and radiation,
Oh
and
my
that feels
gosh,
like
this
a
is really
victory.
speeding past.
Yeah, so
Yeah, and
tomorrow is
Caitlin hasn't thrown up in like 3 days. That's
yeah,
another
that's
great
all 3, yeah, girl. I
victory.
had
She
the
got
worst
so
tummy
sick.
bug. So yes, yeah, girl. I'm feeling way more positive about my life. What's your yeah, girl? Self-care?
I'm
Acupuncture?
ovulating today. That's my
Yay!
yeah, girl. Yes, I'm ovulating today, which is great news because that means that my HCG levels have fallen. It means that my body feels healthy enough to try to get pregnant again, though it is not. Because of the medication and surgery and everything from the ectopic pregnancy, I need to wait many more months before I
Mhm.
try to get pregnant again. And I went and got my blood drawn this morning to see my iron status and nutritional status and to see sort of how things are going for my body after I've really, I feel like I'm at like I'm not sick anymore. I am not in pain anymore. I'm a far cry from where I was before this pregnancy, but I'm in a better place today than I've been at any point through since I lost the
Yay.
baby.
Hallelujah.
So things are moving forward. Yeah, I'm going to go get some
Mhm.
acupuncture, which I have committed to doing every week. And so, yeah,
Go
girl
girl.
to
Yeah,
me
girl for
for
that.
being on the up and up. And yeah,
Mhm.
girl to my husband. I've just overheard him talking a few times in the past few weeks, saying things like, well, when we move, we're going to want a house with X amount of bedrooms because we're only going to have more kids. And when we try for our next baby, we'll blank, blank, and blank.
Amen.
And so
Louis,
it's
way
really
to
cool
get
that
on
he's
that.
starting to like open
See
his
the
mind to
vision.
that.
Mm,
Yeah, because
that makes me
I
happy.
mean, this impacted him greatly. Almost losing me really made him be like, F having more kids. I just want my wife alive. Like, I don't
Mhm.
care, whatever. Like, 2 kids, fine by me. I just don't want her to die. And so it's
Now
nice that he's starting
he's
to
adding real
dream.
life. Yes, I love that. Mm.
And if
Yeah,
I
girl.
may give a little tip to the listeners, the worry is real, the doubt is real, the fear is real. I would challenge you to, instead of trying to stop worrying and being afraid, I would challenge you to start trying to spend as much time dreaming about your future as a mother and the future of your family as you do on worrying.
Hey, friends, we're taking a break from our episode to talk about one of our sponsors. And this sponsor is the PCOS app. Did you know that I made an app all about PCOS? Well, I did, and you can find so many resources in it. We have slowly moved all the resources from my PCOS Hormone Academy course over into the PCOS app, and that talks about all things PCOS topically. Like if you have acne, you can go look at the skin and acne modules and see what does Western medicine offer? Why does this impact PCOS? What can we do about it? What are natural remedies? What are nutritional remedies? We talk about hair loss and hirsutism all through that lens where we go through what is it? Why is it impacted by PCOS? Or why do we need to pay more attention to this particular thing? And what can we do about it? And we provide a vast resource to help you both advocate for yourself at the doctor's office and treat yourself at home naturally. Now, the exciting thing that I want to share with you is starting in January 2025, we're starting to migrate all of the content that I have published so far on fertility into this app. I used to sell a course for $700 all about how to get pregnant with PCOS, and that is all getting moved into the app between January and March. So you can take the course as if you enrolled in the whole thing for $10 per month. So head to your app store, whether you're on a Google Android device or an Apple device. If you type in PCOS app, you just look for that really pretty lavender flower, you'll find it. Download it and join us because you're going to get weekly recipes and all the fertility focused PCOS content that you need. It will start being uploaded under the Academy tab. So stay tuned for that. And let's get back to our episode.
So if you find yourself worrying, give yourself a challenge to do some dreaming later that day. So that's my tip for you.
Okay. Yeah, girl. Yeah, Louie. Great episode. We'll see you next week.
Ah.